join me. We will be reading Malcolm and the Magpie by Dana Goldstein. House number 5 was the ugliest house Malcolm Walters had ever seen. He should know, having already lived in 4 houses since he was 6 years old. Now that he was 11, he knew the difference between an awesome house and one that needed help. House number 1 was across the road from a park with a pirate ship in the playground. House number 2 was what Malcolm's dad called a fun house because the front porch slanted to the left and the back deck slanted to the right. House number 3, Malcolm's favorite so far, had a secret space in the basement, a room hidden behind a bookcase that Mom used to store food, but which Malcolm decided was his secret spy lair. They were only in house number 4 for a summer, so it was good it had a pool. And now, here they were, staring at the front of house number 5. When they pulled into the driveway, Malcolm's mom said, "Oh my." And his dad laughed and said, "Maybe they gave me the wrong address." But he turned off the car and got out anyway. Because they moved so much, Malcolm's family didn't have any furniture of their own. In every house, they had to live with what was already there. Lumpy beds, wobbly tables, and TVs that were as big as a smart car. The only things Malcolm's owned were his clothes, a small pile of his favorite books, and his handheld games console. Every time his family moved, they left a trail of life behind them. Crumbs behind the fridge, plastic baggies behind the kitchen drawers, socks under the washer and dryer. Malcolm really didn't care about any of those things. What was hardest for him was having to say goodbye over and over again to the friends he'd made. Making friends at 6 was way easier than it was at 11. Most of the time, the kids in his classes had been together since kindergarten. At recess on his first day to new school, Malcolm would scan the playground for the other military kids whose parents moved around a lot. You could tell a military kid by the physical space they put between themselves and the others. During the first dinner at house number 5, Malcolm asked the same question he did every time they moved. "Can I get a puppy?" His parents glanced at each other before their sad eyes landed on him. "Let's wait until we see how long we're staying." "But we never stay anywhere." "Malcolm," his father said with a serious tone, "it's not fair to a dog to keep moving from place to place. It'll never be settled. Dogs can't adjust as easily as humans. But we would have each other. We'd be best friends. I would be the person it can settle with." "We're sorry, Malcolm," his mother said. "We don't think this is the right time." Malcolm, his mouth full of pizza, could only nod in response. After dinner, Malcolm went to check out the backyard. House number 5 was built on the edge of a ravine. The grassy lawn sloped towards the far edge, and there was a wall of trees marked at the end of a property. In the dim light of dusk, the trees formed long, dark shadows. Malcolm shuddered at the thought of wolves roaming out of the ravine at night. Early that Saturday morning, as the trees were changing colors, Malcolm headed out to the edge of the ravine, rake in hand, to clean up the fallen leaves. He liked raking leaves and found calm in the repeated motions of lift, pull, and pile. The dry, papery rustling relaxed his mind. When he was done, Malcolm had 3 big piles of leaves to bag. As he scooped up armfuls of leaves, a bird stood near the 3rd pile, watching him for a moment before plucking twigs from the foliage. Malcolm noticed the bird when he moved to the 2nd pile. It was about the size of a bowling pin. Its head, neck, chest, and back were black, its belly white. Its wings and tail looked like they'd been dipped in berry blue drink powder. His mother sometimes let him stir into his drink this summer. When the bird filled its beak with tiny sticks, it opened its wings, startling Malcolm. The untucked feathers revealed streaks of white, and in the sunlight, the rich blue gold with shiny green. The bird flew into the trees in the ravine, disappearing below the pointed tops of pine trees. Malcolm was working on bagging the 2nd pile of leaves when the bird returned. It tilted its head sideways, eyeing Malcolm as if waiting the human's body's intentions. "Oh, hello, bird," Malcolm said. "Welcome to my yard." He smiled at the bird, who tipped its head from side to side, keeping one beady black eye on Malcolm. "Did you come back for more twigs? I'm sure there are lots in here." Malcolm squatted down to the pile, parted the sea of leaves, and dug around. As he picked out tiny bits of trees, he put them in a pile to his right. The bird watched, its head bopping and tilting so both eyes could see what was happening. "You take these," Malcolm told the bird, stepping away from the pile he'd built. "These are for your nest, right?" The bird hopped toward him. It filled its beak with as many sticks as would fit and flew back to the ravine. Malcolm took a break in the middle of bagging the third heap of leaves. He felt a tickle on his arm, and he noticed a ladybug crawling from his elbow to his wrist. He watched the red and black insect make its way to the palm of his hand. Before he could count the dots, the bird returned, swooping down to Malcolm's open hand and plucking the bug up with its beak. It swallowed it whole and flew off again. Malcolm was stunned. A bird had never come that close to him. He turned in a circle, looking around for it. "Malcolm," his mother yelled from the deck, "come in for breakfast." "I'm not hungry," he called back without tearing his eyes away from the ravine. "I made pancakes," she called back. Malcolm's stomach betrayed him with its grumbling response. He walked back into the house, turning his head toward the lawn, but the bird wasn't there. The next morning, Malcolm's search of the internet told him the bird was a magpie, part of the corvid family, along with crows, ravens, and blue jays. They were omnivores who ate everything from insects to berries to rotting flesh of dead animals. Not too proud to eat from the garbage. Extremely smart birds, he read, who can recognize human faces. Malcolm raced out the yard, sitting on the dewy grass and hoping the bird would return. When the cold and wet started to seep through his sweatpants, Malcolm rose, walking around the ravine. "Bird," he called out, "can you hear me?" Malcolm didn't know how to make magpie sounds, but he did know how to whistle. He put his lips together, pushing air out and bringing air in, making the sound wobble and thrill, rise and fall. He was met with silence. He whistled again and again, but still no response. Malcolm pressed his lips close. His shoulders sagged. The chill of his wet pants was making him uncomfortable. He turned away from the silent ravine, feeling foolish for thinking the bird would come when he called. Malcolm was almost at the deck when he heard a bird singing its own song. The sound was a mix of squawks, squeaks, and peeps. The sun had risen above the tree line, forcing Malcolm to shade up his eyes with his hands. He scanned the sky and the horizon. From the dark outline of the trees, Malcolm saw something moving. The shout of the bird came clear as it got closer. The bird swooped close to Malcolm's head, forcing him to duck. It swooped at him again, this time dropping something on the grass. The bird made an elegant landing, ruffled its feathers, and waited. Unsure of what to do, Malcolm took a few steps forward to see what the bird had dropped. Through the blades of grass, something glinted in the sun. Malcolm bent down and picked it up. It was the tap from a pop can. "Is this for me?" he asked the bird. "You brought me a present." The bird chirped 4 times in response. "Thank you, that's very kind," Malcolm said with a bow of his head. The bird mimicked his movement, bobbing its own head before flying off. The next day, Malcolm found a tiny light bulb, the kind you would find in a desk lamp sitting on the deck. In return, he left shelled peanuts in a glass bowl. After school, Malcolm found the peanuts were gone. In their place was a zipper pull. For the rest of the week, Malcolm put out bits of food, raw meat, other nuts, and some berries, and nearly every day he was rewarded with a present. Malcolm now owned a golden hoop earring, a yellow paper clip, and an oddly shaped white item that can only be a rock or a bone. With every gift, Malcolm would yell, "Thank you," toward the ravine. The next week, whenever Malcolm would head to the backyard, he only had to wait a few minutes for the bird to appear. "Would you like a name?" he asked one day. The bird strutted across the grass, which Malcolm decided meant yes. "How about Bob?" The bird let out an angry squawk. "Frank?" "Squawk." "Maybe you're a girl bird. How about Sally?" "Squawk." "Coco?" Another loud squawk. Malcolm scrunched his forehead in thought. The bird stretched its wings, giving them a shake, then tucked them back against its body. Malcolm marveled at the glow and the shine from its feathers. Depending on how the bird stood in the sunlight, the colors would change from green or yellow or even purple. The magpie contained almost all the colors of a rainbow. "I know," he shouted, causing the bird to hop back a few steps. "I'll call you Spectrum. Do you like that one?" The bird chirped and clacked its beak, then started singing a symphony of notes. "Okay, Spectrum it is." As fall turned to winter, Malcolm and Spectrum went every day in the backyard. Spectrum watched from the roof of the house as Malcolm walked to school. On his way back home, Spectrum flew overhead, stopping on fences, park lawns, and lawns along the way. Malcolm tried very hard not to think of Spectrum as his pet, but for a wild bird, he was as tame as they would come. Malcolm and Spectrum chatted with each other after school or while Malcolm shoveled the snow from the sidewalk in front of his house. "Today was a very good day, Spectrum. I found the new book, my favorite author, in the school library." "Do you remember when and where you got your first feather? Do you think someone who talks to you all day ignores you? Is this someone you'd be friends with?" Through the rest of the winter, Malcolm spent more time outside than he ever had. When he flew down the ravine hill on a sled, Spectrum flew beside him. Then he threw snowballs. Spectrum drove into them as they landed, smashing them apart with his beak. The short bursts of cawing sounded like laughter, so he knew Spectrum was having fun. As leaves began to grow back on the trees, however, Spectrum suddenly stopped coming by. Day after day, Malcolm went out into the yard, whistled and called out for his best friend. He was met with silence. Malcolm imagined horrible things. Spectrum getting hit by a car, or eaten by wolves, or flying into a window and suffering a broken neck. "Maybe it's found a mate," his father said with a wink. "Birds come and go," his mother said, trying to make him feel better. "They don't typically stay in the same place for too long." "Kind of like us," Malcolm answered. "I'm sure the bird is fine," she said. But she didn't know how special Spectrum was to Malcolm. "Spectrum, please come home," Malcolm whispered into the ravine. On his last day of school, Malcolm woke up to the sound of something tapping on his bedroom window. He threw back the covers, ran to the window, and pulled back the blinds. Spectrum was perched sideways on the window's trim, its black eyes looking for Malcolm. Malcolm opened the window and Spectrum flew down to the yard. The bird landed beside another magpie sitting on the grass, slightly smaller than Spectrum. "So, you are a boy then," Malcolm called out, laughing out loud. He raced down to the yard, slipping on the dewy lawn, to meet Spectrum and his mate. The birds sang and bowed and flapped their wings. Malcolm whistled and danced and bobbed his own head. Malcolm followed the birds into the ravine, forgetting to be afraid. That summer, Malcolm followed Spectrum into a creek where they both had a drink of water and later found a beaver dam near a small waterfall. Malcolm, Spectrum, and his mate built a mini teepee together out of the branches and twigs. "Malcolm, we have some news," his father said to him at dinner one evening. Malcolm looked down at his plate. He knew what was coming. They had this conversation 4 times before. "We're moving again in 3 weeks. 2 seconds. "I don't want to move," Malcolm muttered into his mashed potatoes. "I know," his mother said, "but we have no choice. We have to go." Malcolm imagined what life would be like without Spectrum. He felt this sting of tears work its way to his eyes. His dinner threatened to work his way out of his stomach. He swallowed the pit in his throat, but couldn't contain his anger. "I don't want to do this again," he shouted. "I'm tired of starting all over all the time. I hate leaving. I hate this life." Malcolm pushed his chair away from the table and ran up the stairs to his room. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, and let the tears fall. "I won't be here this fall," he told Spectrum. Malcolm sat on the steps leading off the deck to the backyard. The bird stood next to him, and looking up at his friend. At least you have a mate to stay by your side. You always have babies of your own too. I'm gonna miss you. Spectrum fluffed his chest feathers, then settled down to sit beside Malcolm. They sat like that until the sun set. They both heard the soft calling of Spectrum's mate, but neither of them moved. In the darkness of nightfall, Malcolm said goodbye. House number 6 was deep in the heart of a new city, with a single tree and fake grass in the backyard. Malcolm could walk from the back of the house to the edge of the yard in 15 steps. He sat in a plastic chair on the plastic lawn, waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever did. The bubble of hurt inside his chest would not burst. "Malcolm," his dad called up to him, "can you please put the lawn chair into the garage? It's supposed to snow tomorrow." Malcolm scanned the sky, taking in the dark gray clouds and the threat of snow. He didn't care if a blizzard buried him in freezing cold snow. As Malcolm tilted the chair onto its back legs and dragged it in the garage, he heard a tiny clink. He looked back, seeing a hint of metal slide from the edge of the seat towards the back. He released his chair and walked down to see what it was. A single silver bead. Malcolm gasped, looking up to the sky again. The clouds were thicker now, and he squinted, looking for bright, iridescent feathers among the gloom. He looked back at the house, scanning the roof, but there was nothing there. He pocketed the bead, intending to throw it out, and dragged the chair through the dusting snow that was already sticking to the fake lawn. Inside the garage, Malcolm sat in the chair, chin in his hands. The snow was coming down thicker now, and he was getting cold. He sat there watching the flakes creep into the garage and swirl around the flip-flops on his feet. The sounds of the city traffic softened as the roads were blanketed. Out of sheer boredom, Malcolm whistled, trying to replicate the bird calls of some of his favorite songs. The wind responded with its own whistle. Malcolm sagged back into the chair. Spectrum was gone, and Malcolm was lost. He sat and cried until he felt his grief lift a little. When the cold burned his toes, Malcolm wiped his face and trudged through the snow in the backyard. In the quiet of the snowfall, Malcolm thought he heard a familiar twitter, and then a crackling. He held his breath, straining to hear. He heard a loud caw, and a softer croak. The flakes were stinging on his face, but he stood there, head tilted to the side so he could listen carefully. When no sound came, he figured he was hearing things. Malcolm pushed through the grate to the backyard, his shoulders hunched. But as the heavy wooden door swung open, Malcolm felt his breath catch in his throat. There, sitting on the fence, looking like snow-capped statues, were two birds that Malcolm knew well. Spectrum and his mate spread their wings and cawed happily. A smile spread across Malcolm's face. His friends had found him after all. I'll read the little section here at the end of the story. Dana Goldstein began telling stories at the age of 6 when she was punished and sent to her room. Her instructions were to not play, not read, not color, just to sit on our bed and think about what she had done. To quell the boredom, she started making up stories, which she would tell her captive audience of stuffed animals. Dana is now the author of 2 books for adults and is currently working on STEM-based fiction series for middle grade readers. She lives, creates, and writes from her home in Calgary, Alberta, where she lives with her husband and 2 teenage sons. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope you enjoyed the story. And Merry Christmas.